Hello and welcome to the Summer Sloth Book Nook, a podcast about all things books, publishing and more. My name is Emma and today my guest is Joseph James. Joseph is a business mentor and author. Now before we get started, please take the time to like and subscribe our YouTube channel or you can write us a review on Apple Podcasts. It'll really help our podcast to grow. Now on with the show. Thank you for coming on the podcast today, Joseph.
You're so welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm all good. So, first things first, how did you begin your writing journey?
I mean, I was always really into keeping journals and notebooks, probably as long as I can remember. I always loved the way, writing things down helped me to process them. And it just was a very natural kind of way of communicating for me. As I got older and I started to kind of develop my own business, I found that I was devouring as many books as I could get my hands on everything from personal development to business growth, lots of biographies, things like that. And I think it was about 2012, something like that. I was asked to teach a course at a coaching school in the States. And they kind of said to me, "Oh, do you have examples of your work?" So I was able to pull up lots of articles that I'd done just for different websites and things like that, and kind of turn those into my first course. So, God, that was about 7 years ago now. So since then, I've always loved writing and reading. It's always been something I've really been interested in. I know lots of people prefer, vlogging and podcasting, but to me, writing's always been my favorite thing, really.
Yeah, of course. So, your specialism, would you say, is sort of within the business books area?
Yeah, so I'm a business coach and mentor, and I focus predominantly on money mindset and income streams. And how I kind of came to that place really was through growing my own business. And one of the reasons I was so excited to do your show is because a large part of what helped me to develop my business was writing books and courses on mindset, on business growth and strategies and things like that. And that really came from just, as I'm sure you did, devouring every book I could get my hands on, since I was, God, as young as I can remember, just always reading. And, I used to love just going and just devouring biographies of inspirational people and things like that.
Yeah, I have to admit, sometimes I don't always finish every book that I buy. I have to admit, it's just keeping on top of reading. Sometimes can be very difficult, especially with time constraints. But with the development of sort of technology now, it's more accessible to read on the go. I don't know if you found that as well, that with the way that books and stuff have changed, do you find that is something that you do more?
Absolutely. I mean, I still do love I call it a real life book. The book collection I have on Amazon is called Money Mentoring with Joseph James. Those are all Kindle books, and it was a very conscious decision because most of my clients and the people that were following my work were busy professionals on the go all the time, and I wanted to develop something, like you said, to really make it much more accessible and easier for people to kind of access rather than carrying around 3 or 4 books. Although I've been known to do that myself when I travel. I don't think you can beat a real life book, though, I have to say.
No, exactly. I think also you want to have the book with you because one, you don't have to charge a book, and two, you got something there you can just flip out on the go. You can just sit down and read like wherever. But yeah, I think it depends on the person. Some people are more technology minded now, or some people just love a traditional book. So I think it's just aware of people's preferences, really.
Absolutely. I mean, I get a lot of people asking me if I would consider doing audiobooks, and I absolutely would. I think it's about, like you said, finding what works for your audience and finding kind of different ways of really communicating. One of the reasons I love writing so much is I love sharing things that have worked for me, sharing ideas that I find empowering, and sharing really practical tips that people can follow in their life and business. And I think whether that's writing in a traditional sense or it's writing and then recording, it's always been something that I've loved to do. I mean, even earlier today, before we jumped on our call, I was kind of sat with my notebook and just journaling some things. It's such an important part of my daily routine as well.
Yeah, of course. So Kind of moving on. So when you first began writing your books, what were the key things you kind of had to think about?
Wow. So the books I have on Amazon are actually taken from coaching courses that I had taught, and it had been something that I'd wanted to do for a really long time. And the first thing I needed to think about was how to kind of condense a lot of information into a very digestible and very kind of easy to follow way. I wanted, to take some of the courses I'd done, and I wanted to turn them into, books people could access on the go, and get really helpful tips to go and use. So the first thing I needed to think about was what were the main points from the courses. Something I teach in my courses and go through a lot with my clients is the things that are really normal and day to day for us can actually be life changing for our clients when we package them correctly. And with that in mind, what I wanted to do is make sure that I didn't overwhelm anyone with too many ideas at once. So I really had to try and condense things down into very practical steps. Three of my books are actually, there's one called, 21 Quick Ways to Get Organized and Focused. And the reason I did that was because I love the idea of it being really tangible, and also, a clear number so people know what they're getting. That one in particular was really fun to make. And then another one is called 33 Income Streams. And that was, I wouldn't say it was harder, it was more challenging because it came from a money mentoring course I taught. And I really had to, I'm not sure the business phrase for this. I had to take a lot of recordings and a lot of class notes I'd done and try and put them into a really solid book. So that was the first thing, was about how to kind of get clear on the messaging, and kind of trimming the fat, really. I think as a writer yourself, I'm sure you probably find the same thing. Sometimes we want to just keep going on and on. And I think it's really important to try and find that point where you go, you've made your point, now move on to the next bit. So that was definitely the first thing. The second thing was really making sure that I was comfortable with the tone. I wanted them to be very kind of to the point, very practical as well. I don't think it's helpful for people, especially if it's a business book, to give people too much to think about. I think it's helpful to give people a bit of mindset, bit of coaching, and then practical steps they can take.
Absolutely. And as you said, it's just keeping self-interested whilst reading and writing your books is quite a key thing to keep motivated, because sometimes you can definitely have a slump when you're writing something you enjoy. How did you sort of keep yourself motivated when you were writing your books?
That's such a good question. How did I keep myself motivated? So one of the things I did was make sure I took regular breaks. That's really important. And I know as writers, when we're in the flow, we don't want to stop. But I think it's really important to take regular breaks. When I found myself dipping in motivation or maybe hitting a wall, it was some advice a client gave me, actually. And she said, go to a different place in your apartment to write if you're stuck. That really helped. I guess it just changes up the sort of stimulation that your mind's getting. But I would say the main thing was probably going for long walks or jogs. I live near London Bridge, so I live quite near the river up here in South London. So I was going for lots of walks and just kind of consciously trying to switch off. I'm not sure if you work in a similar way, but I find sometimes going away and letting my mind kind of rest or think about something else actually helps me to come back a lot more focused on the thing I'm trying to write.
Mm. I think, as you said, when you're writing, you kind of need to take yourself out of the situation. I'm currently having that problem with some of my dissertation writing. It can get a bit tedious sometimes, so I pick a point to stop writing. So I write 500 words on each story that I write, and I feel like that's the best way for me to do it. However, some people can just write and go for it. Other people just choose to do a day a week. So I think it just depends on how you write and how your schedule is like around everything. So I think it's just up to the individual person how they choose to write.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of my clients is a national journalist, and she was saying that she will regularly literally lock herself away for sort of an entire weekend or a 3-day weekend and just, make sure there's, food and coffee and all that stuff, and it just sits at the laptop in one go. And I think as long as it's working for you and it's feeling good and it's getting you the results you want, then, go for it.
Absolutely. So, kind of moving on to the next question, what are the challenges of writing and sort of publishing your book?
I would say so the people who come to me for coaching, I would say probably about half of the people that I work with, either coaching or mentoring, part of what they want to do is some form of writing. So they either want to write a course, they want to write a book, or they want to start to just put things down, into that kind of form. I would say the biggest challenge is the mindset. One of the biggest things I see is keeping people very stuck is they keep procrastinating, and they think that they have to feel ready to start. And one of the biggest things I always try and coach people on is, you don't have to wait to feel ready to start. The ideal thing is just to pick a time. Like you said, with, you allocate a time for writing. I always try and say, allocate a time for starting. No matter how you feel, just start. The second thing I think probably people may find challenging is potentially not knowing where to start. And I remember a few years ago, an editor friend gave me some really, really good advice. And he said, imagine you're just sat with a friend having a coffee and you're making notes about what you want to talk to them about. Just start writing those. And I'll never forget that. That was so helpful for me because, staring at a blank screen is never helpful. So what I teach in one of my programs and with my clients is what I call skeletoning the book or the article or the program. So rather than looking at, say, a blank page, what you would do is create a skeleton to then fill in. So you'd write the title, you'd write intro, and then you'd write maybe the chapter titles or whatever it is. So you'd create like a framework and then just fill in a little bit of that each day or each week, depending on how you write best. But I think it's definitely important to give yourself permission to start even if you don't feel ready, and also give yourself a framework to fill in, because I'm sure you can agree here, staring at a blank page is probably one of the worst things you can do.
Definitely, because it just makes you feel, it sort of sinks your heart a little bit when you're just staring at a blank page for ages and not getting anywhere. Yeah, definitely been there. Definitely have been there. So lastly, I always get stumped this question for a lot of people, but is there a book that you've read recently that you would like to recommend?
Absolutely. So it's kind of an oldie one. It's called The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, and it's by Joseph Murphy. I read it about 10 years ago, and it had a huge impact on the way I started to think about myself and my business. And it was really, I would say, it played a really big part actually in changing a lot of things in my own life and giving me things to work with. I'd recommend anybody who's interested in exploring the psychology behind, the power of your mind and sort of achieving different things and how you can change behaviors that maybe aren't working for you anymore. I would definitely recommend that book. Some of the language is a little bit far out if people aren't necessarily into that genre of work. But if you can sort of ignore the bits that maybe, I don't know, don't resonate with you, it's an incredibly beautiful book. It's very powerful. And I love it personally. Yeah.
Definitely. Cool. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. You can follow Joseph on Twitter at JosephJamesMMS. If you'd like to get involved with the podcast, you can get in touch through Twitter at NovelM16 and use the hashtag Slothcast, or you can send me an email at summerslothbooknick@gmail.com. You can view our episodes on YouTube or listen on Podbean or Apple Podcasts, all under the name Summer Sloth Booknick. You can also follow us on Instagram to see our episode trailers. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share. See you next week. Bye!